Good morning. Continuing the summary and the conclusion of Ayin Beis, Volume 3, we're on page 1429. Aleph Tav Chav Tes. We're now entering into the thick of things, understanding in our relationship between our work, our what he calls Ma'aseh Tachtenim. Literally means the actions below. What it means is refers to our efforts, our work, what impact it has on the divine levels. So being that we know that God himself is immutable, Ani Hashem le'shanisi, and yet that very God wants to have a relationship with us and is the one that actually charged us with doing this work. We're not just doing it because we're doing it. This is why we were created, to make a home for the divine. And yet God is not human in the sense where he has a need and we fill a need, and he's impacted like relationships of human beings, mortals, between each other. So that's where the dilemma comes into play. You know, to say one thing is God is completely beyond, and that's what he wants us to do work, fine. So think of it like a king who appointed his subjects, says, I'd like you to do work, that's what I want you to do. But a relationship you're not going to have with me. Or to put it a different way, you'll have a relationship by doing what I asked you to do. But there's nothing commensurate between us. Like I mentioned a number of times, if we only had mitzvahs maisius, meaning only action-based mitzvahs, so fine, a servant or a subject does not have to understand his master, doesn't have to love his master. But the thing is, the Torah tells us, "V'haftas Hashem Elokecha, v'yadaita hayom v'ashavesa levavecha, ki Hashem Elokim, das Eloki avicha, v'avdu b'lev shalom, v'haftas Hashem Elokecha." These are all relationship-oriented mitzvahs, with his love, and there's love that goes both directions, and there's understanding. So that still doesn't mean that we are equal to God, but it means there's a relationship more than just a mere subject to his master or a servant to his king. So that tells you, and Chassidus of course takes it all the way, that the relationship is a lot more symbiotic and much more connected. But how do you explain it? And that's what we're in the middle of, really, the process, the understanding that relationship. And the role of Malachim comes into play because they're part of the processing and the distribution, essentially the delivery of the Shef Eliki, of the divine flow to us, both from the top down and from the bottom up, meaning they serve like somewhat of an interface, like we see in the dream of Yaakov. He dreamt of a sulam, mutzavatzo resha magia shamayma, a ladder that was planted on the ground, and the top of the ladder goes into heaven. There you got an interface. And who's walking on this ladder? Who's climbing and coming down, up and down the ladder? Malachim. Malachim elin v'yerdim bei. As it says in Sfarim, different places, that this represents prayer. The sulam, the four rungs are the four sections of prayer, the four sections of every morning's davening. And the malachim serve a role of being basically the ones that carry the message from the bottom up and from the top down. Similar to the what we call the cosmic digestive system, which doesn't create the food, but it processes it and turns it into something that can be integrated, both from the top down and bottom up. So this is all part of this discussion here. So far what we've established is, even though he didn't say it explicitly, but you talk about atzmus mamish. He doesn't say this, but I'll say it. You probably wouldn't even say Ani Hashem le'shanisi, because as soon as you say that, you already mean that there is that's the world of shinui, and Hashem is not subject to change. He's immutable. And you talk about atzmus, built to Mitzias Nimtzi, you don't even have to use those terms. So again, this is my addition. He doesn't say it here. I don't think I've seen it in Chassidus explicit, but it's pretty implicit. But then there's Ani Hashem le'shanisi, which then poses the question, so what does it mean, midas lamaila? Emotions. Emotions are about change. Emotions are about a feeling that is evoked by a reciprocity, Like we said, someone sees someone in pain, so you feel empathy for them. Same thing with the emotion chesed and gvura. So there's the chakrim that say there's no midas lamaila. It's only based on the functionality of when the midas are when there's divine emanation of chesed below. So we call that chesed, but there's no actual chesed. The Rebbe Rashab negates that response. He says that earlier we learned in volume 1 that that's correct as far as hispilus, that God is not affected by us. But to say there's no midas above, that's not correct. So how do you explain it? So he said these are divine attributes that come inside the shlemus of the etzem. We call the midas that come in atzmim, not mitzad, they're not being evoked or affected by something else. It's God's shlemus. He wants to express himself in these attributes. But you can't call that in any way shinui or ispilus. Then there's the next level where those midas, at least you call them conceptual midas, however you explain it, comes in tatzilus. There you can call them ispilus, that there's a hergish, there's a feeling, but it's not a ispilus due to something stimulating it. And then there's Malchus of Atzilus, which is the lowest level of Atzilus as it relates to Biyah, and the Malchus itself, the Slapshus in Matat, in the Malachim, in the Matat, and there you could say that there's actual interaction. Like the example that the ministers of the king, not the king himself, the ministers of the king engage with the subjects, with the people. And what could be Bichtzan has a b'chinas ispilus. Like he said in Teireh, the difference between the Eiris and the Kalim, in the Eiris it's Yedua, it's known. In the Kalim it's he knows, Yedeya, which means it's more of an engaged involvement. And that's the meaning of Rachamim Shemispalis Rachman Racham Arachmenu, and that's why Dafka Homu Mei Loy. Why may I? Hamu, why is his innards anguished? Because that's where there's anguish. That's where there's midas. That's where there's an effect, where God has pain, so to speak, from our pain, or is at least affected by it. But what means God here? We're talking about godliness as it manifests already in Ishtalshlus and all the Malchus as it relates to Biyah. Rachem Arachmenu. And then, and with that he concluded, I didn't read everything, the last section on page 1429, but I decided to skip part of it, but we conclude, and that's what we say in Birchas Yetzirah, the Birchas before Shema. Remember, it's the Malachim that we speak about. There it says, B'rachamecha harabim rachem aleinu. So again, you see Rachamim brought there, and that prepares us and helps us when we come to Shema to do the job of being mamshich yichud, echad, and even the nefesh habamis should be affected by it. So the malachim are serving as a support to that. Again, the digestive system, the support to help us achieve that work. And that's where there's a much deeper engagement, where you could say the divine is relating to existence, like we say, Mamala Kalalman, Yehi Ur, Yehi Rakia. When you just say that Ola B'Ritzeni, that God desired to have existence, that's still on God's terms. That's on the level of Leishanisi. But when you say that God is engaging now, 6 days of the week, he's involved, so to speak, in creation, that's the level of Elikuz, that's engaging with existence, and that's where you could talk more about the concept of Shinui and Hispilus. But now we're going to go to the next section. We're going to learn now the new paragraph on page 1429, where he's going to explain this in more depth and more length, based on Maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek. We learned this, as I said, the first time. It's actually a Maimer of the Alter Rebbe. I'm looking at my notes here. Tovkuf Samachei. But as explained by the Tzemach Tzedek in Biurei Hazer, volume 1, page 31 and on. And there's more places where it's discussed. So, ready to move on here. New paragraph, page 1429. Unless somebody has a question, happy to clarify anything. We shall continue here now on this page. Ubir Inyan Hanal. And to explain this Inyan Hanal, and he says actually in the parentheses, what's the Inyan that he's coming to explain? The Shinui Shayach Rak B'B'chinas Malchus, concept of change and shifts is only in the level of Malchus, and how Malchus u'kamoy shemislabeshes b'matat. And not just Malchus, but as Malchus manifests in Matat, like he brought at the bottom of the previous page from the Pardes, the Ramak. Mashenkim b'lamayla mahamalchus. By contrast, that which is higher than Malchus, hagam shashpa hi milmayla, even the ashpa comes from there. But there, you can't apply shinui. So you need to explain how this works exactly. And that's what he's coming to explain. So Yuvan, this will be understood al pi masha kosav, b'mokamacher, according to what it says elsewhere. And that mokamacher is, like I just said, the Biyuri Hazeir, in an entire discourse from the Alter Rebbe, and then Tzemach Tzedek develops it, al maimer Hazoyar, a discussion on the statement in the Zohar, Vayera, the Pasha Vayera, Kuf Tes Ayin Beis. So the Zohar 109b, on the Pasuk, V'hu misibes mishapech b'tachbelesav lefalam. Talking about God, that He so-called arranges the affairs so the expression exactly the musibis mishapech betachbelesav lefalam. He causes, he's the one that is going to explain, the Zohar is going to explain, it's like the potter's wheel, but I'm trying to translate the very verse. I'm trying to remember the exact translation. Musibis mishapech betachbelesav lefalam. He manipulates, I don't say the word is manipulate is not the right word. He causes and impacts all the events to make them effective. So basically, God is running and governing the existence, is what he's saying here. So the Zohar interprets it like this. That God maneuvers, causes things to like think of someone who's running, the captain of a ship. So he has to maneuver constantly to guide. Mesabiv sivuvim causes effects. Va'aisa uvdin liskaima ulabosa the chashiva b'nei nashe. The iskaim inu uvdin kuchabrichu mahapachlan. So this literally means, like, he's going to interpret it in the parentheses according to one of the commentaries on Zohar. But it means va'aisa uvdin liskaima basically causes all the affairs to be sustained. So let's see how he interprets it in the parentheses. Eir Achama is one of the commentaries on the Zohar. That God beforehand established Keda Haderis means he calls forth the generations to come and in a sense creates them. So in other words, God is essentially laying out the whole creation. Think of like maybe an example of a captain was one example. Could be also like an architect that lays out like for example the Deir Hamabel, the generation of the flood. V'heim chashvu ulabasa d'chshiva b'nei nash diskaimin. They thought that they would live forever. But v'kilkulu ma'aseyem, they digressed and they were destructive in their behavior. Ubotlam v'hovcham hakiyim elaheder. And God eliminated them through the Mabel, the flood, and transformed them from kiyum, from existence to non-existence. So in other words, there's essentially a creator who is managing the world. And that is what the Zohar is saying. B'sabim sevubim va'aisa uvdin l'skaima. And though people think that they can run the show, so to speak, we see if they are self-destructive, ultimately they disappear. That's what he says. And then the Zohar continues, and what process does he use to govern and, so to speak, to maneuver and to make all this work? Begin the high tikla istachas kamei. Like it is with a high tikla. Tikla is the potter's wheel. So a potter is turning a wheel to shape the wheel. Tikla hu galgal, he says. Tikla is a galgal. Galgal is a wheel. Sha'uman oiseboyes aklei cheres. That the potter uses to make and shape a klei cheres, a pottery, basically. So essentially what the Zohar is explaining is that there's a whole process that God uses to create and maintain existence, and that's what determines everything. So you see here, he's talking about Ma'aseh Tachtenim, because our actions have an impact, and in turn, God chooses to either preserve or to, unfortunately, to limit, I don't want to use the word annihilate, but to end, to annihilate the people who were destructive, as it was in the Mabul, in the flood. So he's going to use this now to explain this concept of Shinui. The Maimer from the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek uses this Zohar to explain this concept that we're going to talk about now, Shinui, and what level is the tikla, the wheel, and so on and so forth. V'adugma l'mayla, what is an example of this above? This example, he says, it's referring to Hubchinas Malchus d'Atzilus. This wheel that he's referring to is the level of Malchus of Atzilus. She mokar hamesava kol hanevroim debiyah. That's the source, the creation of all the creations of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Umachaya esam, and he sustains them. Like it says, and you create them all. Going back to what we learned earlier, and how does he do that? That's the letters of the supernal speech. When God speaks, the Asara Mamoris Nivra Elam, Hamahava Umachaya, Harizen Nikra Tikla. So God's process of speaking and enumerating and spelling out every aspect of creation, that is what is called tikla here, the galgal, this wheel. So it's not spinning an actual wheel, but it's articulating what he wants, and through that he creates all of existence. So you have two things here. You have the wheel that he's using, or what he calls here the dibur elyon, the speech that he's communicating, but then you have Kutchabrichu is the one that's turning the wheel. So there's the potter, and the example is the potter, and there's the wheel he uses. Now, why does he need a wheel? Because on his own, he can't really shape it. That's on a human level. God, of course, can do anything he wants, but again, he wants it to be logical. So essentially, shaping existence is a process. Just like a writer, or an artist, or a sculptor, there's a process of how they shape something from raw material, turning it into something that is that has shape and form. So that's the process that God employs here, that he refers to tikla. V'kutchabrichu, and who's the level? Who is the potter in this case? The one that's doing all of this, like in the language from the Zohar. Kutchabrichu mesaviv sivuvim. Mesaviv sivuvim means he makes turns. He turns a wheel, basically. Who is it? Kutchabrichu b'chinas ein sof hamalubish b'zod atzilus. Kutchabrichu, in this context, so the wheel would be Malchus. And the one turning the wheel, or shaping it all, is Kutchabrichu, which is the level of Ein Sof as it manifests in Zav Atzilus. And as we learn Midas of Atzilus, there's no Shinui in Hispilus, as we'll soon learn. In Malchus, there is a Shinui of Hispilus. So now the Rebbe Rashab quotes this actual quote from the Maimer of the Tzemach Tzedek. What is the Zohar coming to really be mechader? What is it coming to tell us? I mean, to tell us that God is the creator, we know that. What is that? What is it really coming to resolve? What the dilemma or issue is it coming to resolve? So he says, the kavanas ha-maimer, the intention of this Maimer in Zohar, who Shabola Farish is coming to explain a paradox. Because on one hand we say Shemi P Elyon Leiseitze Hareyas Chaz v'Shalom. The P Elyon means from God's mouth, from the mouth above, nothing negative, no ra can ever come from above. Klal. Leiseitze Hareyas Chaz v'Shalom Klal. Ki lo yegur chara ksiv. because evil does not touch him. There's no evil there. Ukamayim Razal, as Razal tells us, the sages teach us, Ein Ra Yerid Mamayla. Evil does not come from above. Ki'im, rather, Hu Yizbarach, Hu Mokar Hatev, V'Ametiv Lakel. God is the source of good and does good to all. On the other hand, we see there is evil in this world. So the question is, where does it come from? If it doesn't come from above, where does it emerge from? That's what the Zohar is concerned with. And we'll soon see how he explains it. So, let me stop for a moment if there are any questions, because now he's going to go into parentheses to explain a little more what this means, that God is completely good and only does good. But let me stop if anybody wants me to clarify anything. So the Rebbe Rashab adds now that Tzarech Leimer, you have to say, the Zel b'bchinas Eidin Sof Shelamayla Matzilis, that we say God is completely good and only does good, referring to Eidin Sof higher than Atzilus, b'chinas Eidin Sof HaBligvul, Shurak b'chinas Chesed v'Teiv, the infinite divine light, which is only kindness and goodness. Like the level of the abundance of Chesed, which is Arechampin, which is already Kesed, higher than Atzilus. We'll soon see why he says that we have to say that. Why we have to say that, I'm not sure yet. Even though in Arechampin we know there's also a level of Gvura, and Gvura is not Chesed, Gvura is more the din, judgment. Gam Kain, Yeshleimer Shari B'chinas Hamidus the Arechampim Ein B'chinas Mitzias Nekeres, V'lei B'chinas Ischalkus Klal. So even though there is Gvura there, but it's not taken on shape yet. They're not Mitzias Nekeres, a Mitzias like we learned earlier, the letters that you cannot yet discern them, and they're not yet broken down. So yes, the potential of Gvura is there, but it's not yet a definable attribute called Gvura until it gets into Atzilus. Now, he doesn't say less smaller Bahai Atika, because in Atik you say there's no small altogether. But he does say there is Gvura, but it's not yet Nikeres and Ischalkus Klal. And in general, this is a level of Gili Er, a revelation, that's Ein Sof and Bli Gvul, without any limits. And that's what Chesed is, because Gvura is withholding. Gvura is restraint, concealment. And here we're talking about a flow that's not limited, so it's Chesed. The Yeshleimer, he says, and this is relevant to, just a second. Just want to see where this parenthesis goes till. It's a pretty long parenthesis, I think. Yeah, it goes all the way to the bottom of the page almost. But let's continue, because he's connecting it to everything we've learned earlier. So I'll explain it, but let's continue reading. Yeshlema, this is, in general, in the microcosm, Atzilus, and higher than Atzilus. But this is Bedugma, like it is in Eidei Sof Kedem Atzimtzum. So we know macrocosm, in the macrocosm, Eidei Sof before the Tzimtzum, the infinite divine light radiated in a revealed way, through the letters of the Shimu is the trace or the impression that remains after the Tzimtzum, but before the Tzimtzum there were letters, but you couldn't see the letters. Because that's the Keich HaGvul, like we speak of the 10 hidden spheres. God envisioning existence, but it's all subsumed and all completely saturated with the Ein Sof Bli Gvul, to the point the Keich HaGvul is there. God has the power to create the finite, but it's not yet manifest. So it's not nikr, even though it's there, within, so to speak. Think of something like submerged in an infinite sea of energy. So it's there, but it's not apparent yet. Ki'im hayakol b'chinas ein sof mamash. Everything there is in the form of ein sof mamash. So the same thing here, that there's no gvura, it's all chesed, only the gilui. But it still qualifies in another parenthesis within the parentheses, but we did learn that before the tzimtzum there are levels. Nevertheless, in the Eir and Sof before the tzimtzum there are different levels. Where it arose in his desire, and then he envisions existence and allocates resources. And the level before that, it didn't yet arise in his desire. The third level, the etzem ha'er. If you recall, like we learned earlier on page 1419 and 1420, all of them have eisius. The question is how much they're manifest and how much they're obvious, and have they become, and how much they have become shaped. So in the law in Lifnei Tzimtzum itself, the eisius harishima, what he calls here, or before Golav Galifu B'tirei law, conceptual God envisioning the 10 hidden spheres is a form of structure, but it's all completely subsumed in the Eir Ein Sof HaBligvul. But there are levels. And continuing the parentheses, V'yadua, the Mashakosa B'Teireh Da Pasach Aliyo. It says in Teireh Pasach Aliyo, that's the same Maimer Vayera Erdana. The Kesser B'chlal U'B'chinas Eir Ein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum. The Kesser in general is compared to the Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum relative to Atzilus. V'imkein yesh leimer. So going back to the original point, the Gam b'chinas Arech Ampin. So you could say in Kesser, also the level of Arech Ampin, Hu shagvura eina b'nikar klal, v'akol b'chinas Gili. That the Gvura is not yet apparent, and everything is in a state of Gili, compared to like Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, as you just compared it. So Zeh b'chinas Chesed v'Teiv. So when we say that God is only good, and only good comes from him, there's no evil that comes from above, he's talking about this level of Arech Ampin and Kesed. But Kolshkein, and for sure, this is the case of B'chinas Atik, which is even higher than Arech, the less smaller Bahayatika. Bahayatika. There's no smile, there's no Gvura Bahayatika. So what we're establishing here is that from God's point of view, everything is goodness and chesed and kindness. Omnom, Gam B'Zad Atzilus, however, Gam B'Atzilus rather, also in Atzilus, the Zoh B'chinas Chesed Gvura Hari Ikrehu B'chinas Chsadim. So even though we're talking here that all of Chesed, the fullest picture of Chesed alone is before Atzilus, but even in Atzilus, in Zoh, where there's already a structure of Gvura, Chesed and Gvura, still the primary dominant force is Chsadim, U'kameshikosu Kizecher Chazdei. It says Kizecher Chazdei, God's Chesed, V'zeu Dehem Mitzad Eir Ein Sof Shalamayla Atzilus. So this is what it means, that both from the point of view of Eir Ein Sof higher than Atzilus, Dehem Mitzad B'chinas Esher Spheres Atzilus, and from the point of view of the Esher Spheres of Atzilus itself, Hu B'chinas HaTevu Meitiv. So he's explaining what the Tzemach Tzedek from the Alter Rebbe's Maimer is saying, that it's all good and goodness. The difference is, in Atzilus, it's obviously already shaped into Gvura, but the main thing is Teva Meitiv. And higher than Atzilus, it's complete Teva because the Gvura hasn't even taken on shape. What you see here is, again, if you recall, the systematic and methodical process of how we go from a level that's completely beyond structure to structure, and then the structure itself takes on more shape and form as we go down. And the same thing is with Chesed and Gvura. So this is all. So he's saying this Maimer of Zohar is coming to explain that we say from above comes no evil. So now after the parenthesis continues the Rebbe Rashab. This is really continuing from the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer. V'rak ba'asusa de latata. It's only due to the effort from below. Shalahem. It's only to the asusa latata of the creations. Ma'elim and mamshicham aleim b'chinas dinin v'gvuras. So then where does Ra come from? Where does judgment come from? Where is the din of Gvuras' severities and harsh severities? It's coming due to our efforts. It's not coming from above. L'tzein leimer Milmaila. So that you're mamshech from above, dinim gvuras, but it's us that initiates it. Ad she beriboy yishtalshlus nasa b'chinas ra gomor lamato. So in other words, if God created the world, and Adam and Chava had not sinned from the tree of knowledge, the same thing with the generations afterwards, including the Der HaMabul, the generation of the flood, as he brought earlier. So it would only be goodness. That's why we say the world is a beautiful world. Toiv. Toiv ma'oid. Every day God said, Vayar Elokim, he saw the world and it was good. Only good. So where does something not good come from? God gave us free will. And due to our free will, when we behave a certain way that's not fitting and aligned with what God wants, that in turn draws down dinim gvuras from above. Actually, it's not Rachmana Litzlan should be the word. To the point that when it comes down, that din and gvura that comes through our effort, due to our mistakes, when it comes down and evolves or devolves, it becomes ra gomer lamata. It becomes totally evil below. So they're saying in this mimer here that this is what the Zohar is coming to address, how you deal with those two sides of it. On one hand, from above, it's all good, but it's our efforts that cause something negative. Like he said, that's what it says, that he says he turns the wheel and responds to how we behave. This is what it says, like what it says in Medrash Eicha, on this pasuk mepi elyon leseitze hareis. And it says also ba'atev. I have to understand what that means. So it says from above. Yeah, I know, right. So from above does not come evil and good. Says the Medrash, Omerab Lozer probably, Mishah, from the time Sha'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Re'ei Nasati Lefanecha Sachayim. When once God said, behold, I present to you Chayim, life, and the opposite of life, Lo Yotzasa Tev Le'esei Ra V'Ra Le'esei Teva. From then on, he says, good never comes to those that do evil, and evil does not come to Le'esei Teva. Ela Teva Le'esei Teva. So those that do good receive good, and those that do evil receive evil. I have to look up the Medrash to see what he says exactly. But let me read on, and then we'll see if we can figure it out. Uba Medrash Reish Pasha Re'ei Isa. In the Medrash, in the beginning of Pasha Re'ei, it says, Ela Me'ileh hara ba le'esei ra v'teva le'esei teva. In other words, it's like cause and effect. That evil brings upon you evil, God forbid, and good brings good. So when you do something good, that's a response to you. V'hainu, the next page, 1430. V'hainu. The Moshe Amar Azal, Kedushin Daf Mem Amud Beis, like it says in the Gemara, Kedushin 40b, Asay mitzvah achas, or Osa mitzvah achas, Asherov, Sheichri Asas Melekav Schus. A person performs one mitzvah, so he is praised because he tipped the scale upon himself, Lekav Schus, to the merit, to the side of the merit. So what do you see from this? That basically from above is only good. If there's evil, it's a result of our evil behavior. which in turn causes it to be drawn down and all the way come down below. And he's explaining it from the Medrash. Obviously, you could ask the question, what do you mean? We see many people who do good things and they suffer. And there are people who do bad things and they prosper. So we'll talk about that afterwards. But that's what he's saying right now. So basically, it's we that control our own destiny, is what he's saying. I'm going to just finish learning it inside, and then we can now analyze and elaborate on it. Shar Reisha Dezah is one of the sections in Emek HaMelech, Perek Nun Beis, Daf Kuf Nun Zayin Beis. Pirish, Mipi Elyon Koi Al Arech Ampin. Mipi Elyon means from the mouth above, the supernal mouth, refers to Arech Ampin. V'gam Al Zah, Shenikra Elyon Ba'atzilus. And also Zah, which is called Elyon. In Atzilus, it's called Mipi Elyon, Elyon. B'hainu Kanal de Ikrei Chsadim. Like we said before, so in Arech Ampin, it's all Chsadim. Gevura has not yet taken shape. But even in Zah, the primary force is Chsadim. So that's Mipi Elyon Leiseitz Aros, only good. Ela Al Yedei Maisa Tachtenim. But it's due to the actions from below, like he said, Asus L'Tata, our efforts, Shemagiyim B'B'chinas Malchus, Shi B'chinas Atikla, which touch and reach Malchus, which is the level of the wheel, Tikla, the Galgal. Valzeh Bo Lefarish, B'Maimon Azeir, and this he concludes, that's what the Maimon Azeir is coming to explain. Being Allah Sman Shalamata, Ad Heichon Hu Magia. That's what the Zeir is concerned with. That our effort below, how far does it reach? Because if God is completely good and we're causing something negative to happen, how deep does it reach in the divine in the heavens, so to speak, or the divine levels? But Eimer, and that's what the Zeir comes to say, Shemagia at B'chinas Malchus d'Atzilus. It reaches to Malchus of Atzilus, Mokra Nivroim, which is the source of the creations. Sha'at Shom Magia Los Man Shalamata V'lo Yeser Hagbo Lamaila, or Hagvoilam Lamaila, but not higher than that. So our Aveda reaches to Malchus, the level of the Tikla, the wheel, where God is engaging with existence and relates to existence, but not higher. Now, there's plenty to explain here and plenty to unpack. But I just wanted to first read inside what we learned here. And I remember when we learned it the first time, this was a long discussion. And I think I don't know if I learned inside with you the Biurei Azayar, but I definitely quoted it. We discusses this at length. So essentially, to sum up in brief terms, is the following. The dilemma here is that God is completely good. And yet we see evil in the world. So where does it come from? So the fact is, it does come from when you conceal the divine enough, it can allow for evil. But God himself is not concealed. It's revealed good. But he gave human beings the ability, to use an example, a simple example that the Maggid uses, the Rebbe quotes it often, that the Tzimtzum is an example of a father, or here's the example for the Tzimtzum. A father who hides from his child in order for the child to elicit from the child the ingenuity to figure out where the father is. But unfortunately, he can hide himself very well to the point the child gives up. So this is how the Tzimtzum is explained. The Tzimtzum was only meant for our benefit, to allow us to be independent entities, independent consciousness, to be able to receive the light, but also for us to initiate on our own. So before the Tzimtzum, like he says, Kulei Tev, it's Kulei Oir. There's no room for anything except godliness. So the purpose of the Tzimtzum was not, God forbid, to do anything negative. It was to allow an independent entity to emerge, like a student, to be able to hear the teacher's teachings and be wise enough to understand that the concealment is not an end in itself. It's only meant, Tzimtzum b'shvil hagilui. So Chassidus explains, like we explained here in different words. However, if the child misunderstands the Tzimtzum, and you look around the world and you don't see godliness, and you say, you know what, maybe God is not, maybe there is no God. Or maybe godliness has left us. however you say it, then there's room where a person wanders off, like Adam and Chava did, that for a moment they had a lapse and they followed, they defied God's instructions and they ate from the tree of knowledge. So in other words, bad choices are a result of a misconceived and misunderstood tzimtzum. The tzimtzum was there for you to choose b'chata b'chayim. Like we said, I've given you two paths, and you should choose the path of life. As hatayv, the path of good. But in the process of allowing for independence, has to allow us also to make the other choice, God forbid. And when we do, like he said, then I don't want to use the word all hell breaks loose, but then that's where the problems begin. Because the tzimtzum was misunderstood, and as a result, people started doing whatever they want to do as if they're independent of God. They forgot about God, at least for the moment. And that already brings down din v'gvuris. And when it's in shtalshel all the way below, now you have something that could literally be against God, defies God. So Adam and Chava, whatever their intentions were, they didn't mean, like he explains in Tanya, I'm teaching now those prakim in Tanya, Perek Chav Gimel, Chav Daled. When a person does a sin, it says, Ein Adam Ever Avera Elim Ken Nichnus Bei Ruach Shtus. The only reason he did a sin was because there was a moment of insanity, of shtus, of folly. Why? Why don't you just say, because he has a temptation? We have a Yetzer Hara and we were tempted. No, it's folly, it's insanity, because if you knew the damage done by an Avera, no one would ever do an Avera. Would a normal human being put their hand in fire? Of course not, because fire burns. If you saw someone putting their hand in fire, you have to say, there's a Ruach Shtus. Something's wrong. Either they don't know it's fire, or they don't know that fire is destructive. So it's due to helam, due to ignorance, it's due to concealment. The purpose of the concealment is for you to be able to choose the right path. But the side effect of a tzimtzum, of a concealment, can end up being something destructive. So in truth, that's really the reality is that if we knew the truth, it would all be, we would choose God's path. That's the ultimate good. The fact that there could be something not good is because we made a bad choice, due to the concealment of the tzimtzum. So the tzimtzum itself, mitzad alakus, is chesed. It's true, it's gvura in the sense that God is concealing. But from God's point of view, there's nothing being concealed. He's only concealing it from us. So that's what he's saying in different words, this whole idea. And that's what the Zohar is talking about. So when we do something, how deep does it reach? How much of an effect does it have, Lamailus? He says it reaches to Malchus, but not higher than Malchus, which now we need to understand what that means. In other words, even when we do something that's destructive, it only reaches Malchus, not higher than Malchus, but also the positive. So the next paragraph he's going to discuss how that plays itself out in Malchus of Atzilus, what is affected, how everything is affected, because at the end of the day, we still need to understand the biggest question. So what are we saying? That higher than Malchus, God doesn't care about our actions? Of course he does. He told us, Atzmus told us to do mitzvahs and to do good. So what does it mean? Back to the Leisha Nisi and Shinri. Where does it impact? How does it impact? And that's what he's going to slowly develop in the next section. But this is all coming to explain, again, the relationship between us, a world of Shinri, and now a world also of the things we do, and what it is Lamaila, Mipi Elin Leisech Areas, and how far, like he says, Ad Heichen Magia, our halasman, our efforts below. So I'll stop here. Any questions? As I said, he didn't fully explain it yet, so there's more to elaborate upon, obviously. But he will explain the next section here.
So I have a question. So our actions that are not so great, are we blocking the hashpa'ah, or are we drawing down gevurot, or a combination of both?
Well, initially I would say a combination of both. Because we're feeding the tzimtzum, like in other words, we're blocking the hashpa'ah because the hashpa'ah is meant for us to align ourselves with God, so we're blocking. But we're also drawing down, like you said, the the words were "Mashicham alim tchinas dinim v'gvuras." But I think you'll understand it better after we read the next page, which we haven't read yet. How exactly it works.
Okay.
So maybe clear, but I would say both at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Can we say that Ashpo is misused with our evil inclination? It's distribute in the wrong directions, not blockage, but going other side.
How is that different than what he just said here? He said that when a person misbehaves or does something wrong, they are drawing down the negative.
Okay.
What are you adding? That what are you saying that
they're
abusing the kindness shown to them? Is that what you're saying?
The energy flow is not doesn't stop. It's just go in a wrong direction.
It doesn't say that explicitly here. In a way, that's true, but he doesn't say that per se. Here he's saying that that generally from above everything is good, and anything that's not good is coming from below. It doesn't go into the details of how exactly, of whether whether you're misusing the kindness shown to you or the blessings that you've received. Doesn't go into that here. But he may, as we continue on, we'll see how he discusses it.
Also, how do you explain the Yesurim and the problems that the Tzaddikim, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had? I mean, I understand plenty of mistakes, plenty of avarot that I could draw down or all that. But what about the Tzaddikim themselves?
So what are you asking? Why do they suffer?
I mean, things that are only good, but they're connected. They're connected to the higher source, so they
what's
be
the
able
question?
to see beyond.
So what are you asking? Why they
So the
suffer?
question is, but they also feel suffering. Like they view it as a suffering, like just like we do.
I said that we need to still understand what does it mean that a person who does good, and then the good suffer and the wicked prosper.
Yes,
he didn't answer that question. He didn't address that yet.
Okay.
I brought that up before. You're asking that question, right? He's saying,
here
he said right now that we bring upon ourselves the good brings goodness and evil brings evil. What about people who do good and it doesn't bring good? That's
well, I mean, there's also a question of tikkunim. Like if you look at it as a one lifetime.
I'm saying, is that what I'm asking? If that's what you're asking, I had the same question which I mentioned before. Are you asking something else?
But well, it's kind of like the same, but not quite, because ordinary people, you could have that question just like you mentioned it yourself. What I'm saying is
but you could say the same question with tzaddikim. If they're doing good, why are they suffering based on what we just learned here?
Correct. Yeah, I guess what you're saying. Okay.
Okay, we'll stop here. Said it's far from over this subject, so we have plenty more to teach here, to discuss, but we're moving along. Any other questions? Keep in mind, we can bring it all back to the main topic, which will. Yeah. I'll stop here, top of page 1430, end of paragraph.